Sure.
Hello and welcome to Speekygeeky. As always, I am your host, Mr. Geek-E. Today we have a very special surprise guest. You may know him from such things as Gobbledygook, Melting Pot, The Very Angry Seven, or perhaps some of his slightly more obscure series like and I'll have to say this slow so I don't mess it up on the name here, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes.
Please welcome to the show, the one, the only, Turtle Titan himself, Mr. Kevin Eastman. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey, thank you very much. So nice to be here with you. Yeah, you got to say the name like 3 times fast, and it sort of gets into a rhythm.
Eventually.
Rhythm.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on to Geek Out with us for a little bit. I know we only have a short time, and we have a Technodrum's worth of questions for you. So if you don't mind, we'll just jump right in, if that's okay.
Please do. Awesome.
We realize Turtles have been around for 35 years now, and there have been a ton of stories that have spanned a ton of iterations and mediums. Were there any stories you wanted to tell with the Turtles that ultimately got cut or never released, either in comics or cartoon, that you wish folks could have seen? And can you give us a snapshot of what it would have been about?
Sure. It's actually what's kind of interesting is one of the things that we're working on right now is it's a sequel to a book we did. Came out, I think the end of it came out 2022, beginning of 2022, and that's The Last Ronin. And with the Last Ronin story, that was a story that Peter and I wrote originally in 1987. Was set 30 years in the future, and then 1987 was also the same year that we started developing the cartoon show and the toys and that whole program. So it kept getting nudged to the side, and then suddenly 5, 10, 15, 20 years had passed, and we hadn't had a chance to get to it. So the timing was right to bring that and finally complete that story, and it was received far greater than we had ever hoped. And it's out as a graphic novel, and now we're working on the sequel to that. Other than that, the only other specific thing that comes to mind immediately is the first Turtle movie that Steve Barron directed and Todd Langdon wrote, and Jim Henson did the costumes. We know that there was a lot of additional scenes shot, because when you're editing a movie down to what they call a kid's length movie at the time, was like 93 minutes was sort of the maximum you're supposed to have that happen. But there was a lot of stuff throughout, and Peter and I always thought it'd be great to go back in and insert all those scenes, but they have unfortunately since been lost to time, and just people like, well, who's going to want to see a longer version of this? And it's all gone away. So that's one of the ones I always like to see that revisited.
And I think like one of the scenes came out not too long ago, or like re saw the light of day here with like the extended Shredder. There's a scene where he was in the dojo, and right. Yeah.
There was a couple of odds that we had there was a VHS of a couple of different scenes that survived the passage of time that had been leaked, and I think some more recently by some as part of a documentary. They were just again VHS bad copies, and you just wish you could see the whole up on the big screen again. So.
Outside of Shredder and Krang, do you have a favorite villain the Turtles have faced off with throughout the years and throughout the incarnations?
Hands down, Shredder and Krang are awesome. I always loved, Bebop and Rocksteady, certainly within the context of those kind of stories. But one of my favorite characters that we developed was actually based on a character developed in the original Mirage Studios universe, and then brought to back in and reinvented and made a much bigger and stronger character in the IDW Turtle series was Rat King. Rat King was such a great villain, and we made him part of a much larger group called the Pantheon, which was some other newly created bad guys, and some from the past and some newly created ones. But Rat King, I would point to as one of my favorites in recent history of as an awesome bad guy.
Agree. I know in the 80s, particularly with Turtle Mania, there were Turtle products just about everywhere you looked. But were there any that were suggested that were just too off-brand, that were where you had to turn them down?
There was, I guess probably could say it now, but I remember there was somebody, and it was our agent at the time, who would, field these and present the options, and we'd all discuss them. But I think Turtle Condoms was something that was mentioned at one time, which he said, I said no right away, and we said, yeah, it was obviously inappropriate for the the age group. But it was Peter and I were kind of amazed at some of the stuff that was proposed that actually worked. We loved the games and the puzzles and the activity books, and then certain other items. The Turtles Hostess pies come to mind as something that just looked wrong. It had kind of a green frosting and this green ooze filling that looked like it might have passed its expiration date or something. I don't know. But yeah, there was quite a wide variety of different kinds of items.
Were there any characters that didn't make it into the 87 cartoon from Mirage, or that came into existence after the series that you wish could have been in that cartoon?
Immediately a couple that come to mind were characters that developed as toys that showed up in some of the comic books, like the Archie series and some of the other ones that didn't make it into the cartoon series. They was a character named Ace Duck, which I thought was one of my favorite toys. You had an evil cat named Scratch in a prison uniform, Monty Moose. There was a couple pretty cool characters that were developed as toys that never made it in, made the full leap. But there was a lot of variety of characters in the cartoon series too. Already,
it's interesting with Monty Moose too, because Dirk Savage reminded me, like the aesthetic of Dirk Savage reminded me so much of what ended up being the Monty Moose figure.
Yep.
Was that happenstance that they look so similar, or was there could that have been part of his origin at one point? That
that's a good question. A little bit too in the weeds for me to go that far back, but I know that that was that I love the guys that were working on the Archie cartoon based series. It was the first couple of Archie books were based on cartoon episodes, and we quickly shifted that to original ideas. But there were so many characters that they brought to life in a way that stuff that didn't make it as toys and didn't make it as but reinvented from different kinds of mutanimals characters that then sort of went on to different areas, to Ninjara and some other stuff that were just great that didn't go much further and sort of got lost in the thing. But we tried in the IDW Turtle series to bring as many of those back as we could as well.
Oh yeah, and I noticed that too, where we had Monty came back in a different fashion, for instance.
Yep. Yeah.
and even was it the porcupine from Palladium even showed up, and not necessarily the same character, but very reminiscent of that.
Most
yeah.
The fun stuff.
Right. So this will be my last question, because I know we only have a minute left here. Of all the video games throughout the years, which would you say has been the most fun for you to play?
I'd say the arcade game, straight out of the box, only because I, to this day, have never, even with the release in the Cowabunga collection, where you could actually save the game along the way, was the first NES game. The first Turtle game was just too hard. I never made it through the water level as hard as I tried. Turtles in Time I like very much, but I would go to the arcade only because it was more of a more fun style where you could play with your mates. You could play with a couple other people at the same time. You played before, you could go online and play with lots of people. But yeah, that was I'd say the arcade game was as a standout for me as one of my favorites. And of course, I love the Turtles pinball game that came out around that time.
Oh yeah,
that was definitely more my speed. So
yeah, incredibly meaningful. I appreciate you coming by here. So thanks again to our special guest, TMNT co-creator Kevin Eastman.
Absolutely, pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. It was awesome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Kev.
Yeah, we'll talk again. Definitely, we'll make sure we get a chance to chat again, my friend.
Love it. Well, that's it for part 1 of our interview series. But stay tuned, because part 2 is coming up right around the corner. We realize you could have been anywhere and you chose to nerd out with us, and we appreciate that. And while you're here, make sure to check out some of our other really cool videos we think that you'll appreciate quite a bit. And if you haven't already, make sure to sub, like, and share with any other folks you think would appreciate the kind of videos we're putting out. So, until next week, Turtle Speaky.
Yo, Ben, you better keep it geeky, man. Cowabunga, dude. Love it.